For 26 years, my life was filled with a void, a deep, aching emptiness that never quite seemed to go away. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when my son was the light of my life, the center of my world. From the moment he was born, I knew he was something special. I was a proud parent, watching him grow up with hope and dreams for his future. We shared countless memories, bedtime stories, his first steps, the school plays he nervously performed in. I was there for all of it, cheering him on, guiding him as best as I could. But somewhere along the way, things changed. I wasn't exactly sure what happened at first. It started subtly. A change in his attitude, a shift in his behavior that I couldn't fully understand. At the time, I thought it was just a phase. Every teenager goes through those, right? But this one felt different. He became distant, more withdrawn, and I found it harder and harder to connect with him. I tried to reach out, tried to talk to him about what was bothering him, but he just pushed me away, more and more every day. The arguments between us grew more frequent, and no matter how hard I tried, the distance between us only seemed to grow. I remember one night, late in his teenage years, when things came to a head. It was a typical evening at home. Nothing extraordinary, just dinner, the usual back and forth about school, chores, and responsibilities. But that night, the tension was thicker than it had been in a long time. He stormed out of the house, packing a bag, and yelled at me, his words cutting deeper than any argument we'd ever had. "I'm done with you," he said, his voice full of raw emotion, his face flushed with anger. "I don't need you anymore." The door slammed shut behind him, and just like that, he was gone. I stood there, frozen, my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. The words echoed in my mind over and over again. "I'm done with you." I stood in the hallway, unsure of what to do next. The house felt so silent, so empty. I tried to understand what had just happened. Where had I gone wrong? What had I done to deserve this? There were no answers, only the deafening silence that hung in the air. He didn't come back that night, or the next day. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Each attempt I made to reach out to him, phone calls, letters, even a few visits, was met with nothing but silence. His phone was turned off. His friends didn't know where he was, and I had no way of finding him. I spent years wondering what went wrong, if it had been something I had done. There were moments when I thought maybe it was just a phase, that he would come back and everything would be fine. But as time went on, I started to accept the harsh reality. He was gone, and I had no idea where to find him, or even if he wanted to be found. The silence became a part of my daily life. At first, I held on to hope. I thought that maybe someday he would reach out. But as the years passed, that hope began to fade. Birthdays and holidays came and went without a word from him. I saw families enjoying the holidays together, and each time it reminded me of the family I had lost. I tried not to let it bother me, but deep inside, the pain never truly went away. As I grew older, I found myself carrying the weight of this silence everywhere I went. It felt like a constant shadow, always with me, always reminding me of what I had lost. I never stopped loving him, never stopped wondering what he was doing, who he had become. But the pain of not knowing, of not being part of his life anymore, was unbearable. I began to wonder if I would ever see him again, if he would ever find it in his heart to forgive me. The silence was deafening, and the years that passed felt like a cruel reminder that no matter how hard I tried, my son was lost to me. But I never gave up hope, deep down. Even after all those years, I still clung to the hope that one day, somehow, we would find each other again. Little did I know that it would take a miracle to make that happen. Life has a funny way of turning things upside down when you least expect it. For most of the years after my son left, I lived a quiet, humble life, going through the motions, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The grief never fully left, but I learned to live with it. I continued with my job, kept busy with daily chores, and did my best to move forward. But deep down, I never stopped thinking about him. It was always there, the aching gap that nothing could fill. My life, for all its routine and simplicity, lacked the one thing that would have made it complete: my son. And then, out of nowhere, something extraordinary happened. A sudden twist in the plot of my life. I remember the day vividly. It started like any other. I woke up early, made my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, flipping through bills, trying to figure out how to stretch my budget for the month. Life wasn't easy, but it was manageable. I had never been wealthy, and I didn't expect to be. I had always been content with what I had, grateful for the small blessings. But that morning, everything changed with a single phone call. It was from a lawyer's office, one I had never heard of before. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some kind of solicitation or error. But the lawyer was very polite, and his tone was serious. He explained that an old friend of mine, someone I had worked with many years ago, had passed away and left me something in her will. It wasn't just a small token or a few belongings. No, this was something far more substantial. She had left me a considerable inheritance, a fortune that I had never anticipated. The lawyer didn't go into detail on the phone, but he told me the amount and asked when I could come in to discuss it further. My mind was reeling. I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, unable to process what he was saying. This wasn't something I had ever expected. My life had been modest. No savings, no inheritance from family, just hard work and simple living. But this was something else entirely. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Or perhaps it was some kind of misunderstanding. But it was real. The lawyer confirmed the details, and I was left in a state of stunned silence. I didn't know what to do with the news. A part of me felt guilty. How could I accept such an unexpected windfall? It felt like it wasn't meant for me, as though fate had played a joke. But the lawyer assured me that this woman had specifically chosen me, and I had no choice but to accept it. Over the following weeks, I worked through the legalities and paperwork, and the reality of the fortune began to settle in. It wasn't just the money that shook me. It was the sudden shift in my world. It felt surreal. The idea that something this significant could happen at a time when I had given up on any hope of change was overwhelming. For years, I had lived in the shadow of that silence from my son. And now, here was something that could completely alter the course of my life. I felt a strange mixture of gratitude and confusion. Why now? Why this? I didn't immediately know what to do with the money. The first few days were filled with practical decisions, paying off old debts, fixing up my home, and taking care of the basics. But as I sat in the quiet of my house, a thought began to creep into my mind. This fortune, as unexpected as it was, could be my chance to do something I had always dreamed of, to reconnect with my son. For 26 years, I had tried to reach him, but nothing had worked. I thought that time had closed that chapter of my life for good. But now, with this newfound wealth, I had an opportunity to find him, to show him that I had never stopped caring. I couldn't help but wonder if this fortune had come into my life for a reason. Maybe, just maybe, it was fate's way of giving me a second chance. I used a portion of the money to hire a private investigator. It wasn't something I ever imagined myself doing, but I had to try. I needed to know where he was, what he had become, and if there was any chance of mending the relationship that had been broken for so long. It was a daunting step to take, one that filled me with anxiety. What if he didn't want to be found? What if he had built a life without me, a life that didn't include the mother who had let him go all those years ago? But despite my fears, I pressed forward. I couldn't live with the regret of never knowing if there was still a chance to make things right. And so, I took the first step, not just for the fortune, but for the hope that one day I could sit across from my son, share a meal, and rebuild the bond that had been lost so long ago. I didn't know if that day would ever come, but with the fortune I had received, I finally felt like I had a shot at it. Weeks passed, and life felt like it was on hold. Every day was a mix of anticipation and anxiety as I waited for the private investigator to gather information about my son. The fortune had opened a door I never thought possible, but I was still unsure about what lay beyond it. What would I find? Would my son even want to hear from me? And if I did find him, how could I ever make up for the 26 years of silence between us? The questions swirled in my mind, but I had already committed to the path. This was my chance, and I wasn't going to let fear stop me. The investigator was diligent, and soon enough, I received the first glimmer of hope. He had tracked down my son's whereabouts. It turned out that he was living in another state, married with children of his own. I felt a wave of mixed emotions, relief that I had found him, but also a deep sense of guilt. So much time had passed, and now he had built his own life. A part of me feared that I would be intruding, disrupting something that had been so carefully built. But another part of me was desperate for any connection, any bridge back to the son I had lost. The investigator also found his address, and after much deliberation, I decided to write him a letter. I spent hours drafting it, unsure of what exactly to say. I didn't want to overwhelm him, but I also didn't want to leave anything unsaid. In the letter, I explained everything, how much I had missed him, how deeply I regretted the way things had ended, and how, even after all this time, I still thought of him every day. I told him about the fortune and how I wanted to reconnect with him, to see if we could start to rebuild the relationship that had been shattered. The letter was as heartfelt as I could make it, but it felt like a fragile thread between us, one that could easily snap if he chose not to respond. I enclosed my contact details, leaving the door open for him to reach out if he was willing. After sealing the envelope, I held it for a long time, unsure whether to send it. My hands trembled, and for a moment, I wondered if this was a mistake. But then, I reminded myself that I couldn't live with the regret of never trying. I sent the letter, not knowing what the future would hold. Days turned into weeks, and I began to doubt whether I would ever hear back from him. I thought about him constantly, wondering how he was doing, what kind of person he had become, and whether he would even care to hear from me. But then, one day, the impossible happened. A letter arrived. My heart pounded as I opened the envelope, recognizing the handwriting immediately. It was from my son. I held my breath, reading his words carefully. His response was measured but not unkind. He explained that, although he was hesitant at first, he had decided to reach out. He told me he had read my letter over and over, struggling to find the right words to say. It wasn't easy for him, but he wrote that he was open to meeting. He also invited me to spend Christmas with him and his family. I couldn't believe it. After 26 years of silence, my son was reaching out to me. Not just with words, but with an invitation to be part of his life again. Christmas, the time of year that had always symbolized family, togetherness, and warmth, was the moment he chose to open that door between us. I could hardly contain the tears of joy and relief that rushed to my eyes. The emotional weight of everything I had carried for years seemed to lift in that moment. I wasn't sure what to expect when I arrived at his home, but the fact that he had invited me was everything. I knew there would be awkwardness, maybe even resentment, but the invitation itself spoke volumes. It told me that, deep down, he was willing to give us a chance. The days leading up to Christmas felt like a blur. I was filled with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. How would it be? Would he be the same person I remembered, or had the years changed him beyond recognition? I found myself overthinking everything: what to wear, what to say, how to act. But when the day finally arrived, I packed my things and made the long trip to his house, my heart pounding with every mile. I arrived a week before Christmas, nervous, but hopeful. The house was warm and inviting, decorated for the holiday season. It was strange and comforting at the same time to see my son's family, to see the life he had built. There was so much I wanted to say, so many questions I had, but at that moment, all I could do was take a deep breath and step forward. I was ready to face whatever came next. As the door opened and I saw him standing there, I didn't know what to expect. He was older now, of course, and had his own family, but his eyes, those same eyes, looked back at me, and for a moment, I saw the boy I had lost so many years ago. He didn't say anything at first. There was no rush. We simply stood there, gazing at each other. And then, unexpectedly, he took a step forward and wrapped his arms around me. It felt like the world stopped for a moment as we stood there, holding each other. The years fell away, and all I could feel was the warmth of his embrace. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but in that moment, something shifted. The silence of the past 26 years had been broken, and it felt like a new chapter was beginning. This was just the start, but it was enough. My son had reached out. He had invited me back into his life. And that, after all this time, was all I needed. The evening I arrived at my son's home was a quiet one, filled with an awkward anticipation that I could feel in the air. I had come so far, physically and emotionally, but there was still that lingering question in my mind. How would we navigate the years of separation? How could we heal the wounds of so much time lost? But as I stood at the door, waiting for him to greet me, I felt a mix of both fear and hope. The door swung open, and there he was, my son. The boy I had raised, the one I hadn't seen in so long, now standing before me as an adult with his own life, his own family. For a moment, neither of us knew exactly what to do. The years had turned us into strangers in so many ways, and yet there was an undeniable recognition between us, a shared history we both carried, whether we liked it or not. His face had changed, of course, but his eyes, they were still the same eyes I had gazed into countless times when he was a child. I saw the echoes of that boy, the one who used to ask for my comfort at night, the one who would come to me with scraped knees and tear-streaked cheeks. But now, standing before me, he was a man. One who had lived his own life, built his own family. He didn't immediately say anything, but his expression softened, and for the first time in years, I felt something, an understanding, a bridge being built, if only slightly. My heart pounded as I took a step forward, unsure of what would happen next. And then, to my surprise, he did something I had never expected. He wrapped his arms around me. The embrace was hesitant at first, as though he was testing the waters, unsure if this was the right thing to do. But then it deepened, and in that moment, I knew. This was the beginning of something new. We stood there, holding each other, surrounded by the warmth of his home. It felt like the years of pain and separation were being undone with each passing second. There were no words, just the comfort of his embrace, the shared relief that we were finally reconnecting. The silence of the past 2.5 decades seemed to melt away in that one simple act of love. He pulled away after a few moments, his face flushed. "I'm glad you came," he said softly. It was such a simple sentence, but it carried so much weight. It told me everything I needed to know. He was glad I had come, even if the road ahead wasn't easy. I was grateful that he hadn't rejected me, that he hadn't turned me away. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things could be different. As the evening unfolded, we settled into a quiet dinner. His wife and children were there too, and they welcomed me warmly, though I could sense their curiosity. After all, I was a stranger to them, someone who had been absent from my son's life for so long. But their kindness, their patience, made me feel less like an outsider. We shared stories, though they were mostly surface level at first. Small talk about work, about the weather, about life. But underneath it all, there was a shared understanding, an unspoken bond that we were both trying to rebuild something precious that had been lost. The conversation was awkward at times, filled with pauses and uncertain words. I could see the hesitation in my son's eyes as he tried to figure out how much to say, how much to share. He had his own fears, his own wounds, and I could sense them. It wasn't easy for him either. But as the evening wore on, I began to see glimpses of the boy I had known, the gentle, thoughtful person he had been when he was younger. He would smile at his children, gently correcting them when they misbehaved, offering advice with a sense of warmth and patience that made me proud. And in those moments, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Despite everything that had happened, he had turned into a kind, loving father, and I was witnessing it firsthand. When dinner was over, we sat together in the living room, the flickering lights of the Christmas tree casting a soft glow around the room. There was still so much left unsaid, but we didn't rush. I had spent so many years waiting for this moment, and now that it was finally here, I didn't want to spoil it with too many questions or demands. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt natural, as if we were both allowing time to do its work, letting the bond slowly be restored. without forcing it. After a while, he turned to me and said, "Mom, I don't know what to say. I've spent so many years being angry, and I know I can't just erase all of that." His voice was quiet, but there was a sincerity in it that cut through me. "But I want to try. I want us to move forward, if that's okay with you." My heart swelled with emotion. All those years of waiting, of wondering if he would ever speak to me again, were fading into the past. We had a long road ahead of us, but in that moment, I knew we had taken the first step. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but we had started the process of healing. We had both reached out, and that alone was enough. The night ended quietly, but there was a sense of peace between us that hadn't been there before. I stayed with him for the week leading up to Christmas, and each day felt like a small step closer to rebuilding our relationship. We didn't solve everything in one night, but we had begun something important. The reunion was just the beginning, and I felt a flicker of hope for the future, something I hadn't felt in years. As Christmas Day grew closer, so did the understanding between my son and me. The awkwardness from the first few days had started to fade, replaced by something deeper: hope. I could feel the walls that had stood between us for so many years beginning to crumble, brick by brick. Each conversation, each shared meal, and even the quiet moments spent together helped heal a small piece of the painful rift that had once defined our relationship. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were still moments when we both stumbled over our words, when the past would briefly rear its head, reminding us of the lost years. But the desire to heal, to make things right, was stronger than any of the resentment or anger that had once clouded our relationship. Slowly, I began to see the man my son had become, a man who had faced his own battles and had, in many ways, grown stronger because of them. He was no longer the boy I had once known, but that was to be expected. Time changes everyone. What mattered now was that he was open to healing and giving our relationship a second chance. We spent the next few days in a kind of quiet companionship. There were no grand gestures, no deep soul-searching conversations that instantly solved everything. Instead, it was the small things that began to make the difference. The way he asked me about my life, how he listened when I spoke about my own struggles, and the way he interacted with his children. I had never seen him as a father before. I had never been a part of that aspect of his life, and seeing him with his kids, patient, loving, and kind, filled me with a profound sense of pride. I hadn't been there for him when he needed me, but I was seeing the man he had become, and I was in awe. His children, too, began to warm up to me. At first, they were shy, unsure of who I was and why I had suddenly appeared in their lives. But as the days passed, they started to open up. I played games with them, helped with their homework, and even tucked them into bed at night. In those moments, I realized that I was not just reconnecting with my son, but also becoming part of a new family, a family that had been built without me, but was now beginning to accept me. Christmas Eve arrived, and with it, a sense of quiet, anticipation. My son and I had not yet talked about the specifics of what had happened all those years ago. We hadn't addressed the pain, the anger, or the reasons for his departure. I knew that day would come, but I also knew that it wasn't the right time. We were still rebuilding trust, and diving into the past too quickly could destroy the fragile bridge we had started to build. So instead, we focused on the present, on the joy of being together, on the family we had around us. That night, we sat together by the Christmas tree. The soft glow of the lights reflected in the windows, casting a peaceful warmth around the room. The sound of laughter echoed through the house as we exchanged small gifts and shared stories. It was a simple night, but it was perfect in its own way. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. I wasn't just a visitor in my son's life. I was a part of it again, and that was everything. After the kids went to bed, my son and I sat down together. It was just the two of us, the house quiet around us. The fire crackled in the background, and for a moment, we sat in silence. It was the kind of silence that wasn't awkward anymore. It felt comfortable, like we were both simply taking the time to be present with one another. Finally, my son broke the silence. "Mom," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I know it's been hard. I don't want to pretend like everything is okay just because we're spending Christmas together. There's a lot I still need to work through." His words hit me like a wave. I had been holding my breath, waiting for him to say something, anything, about the past, about the hurt and anger that had kept us apart for so long. But his words weren't accusatory. They weren't full of blame. Instead, they were an honest admission that he too was struggling to process everything. "I know," I replied, my voice trembling. "And I don't want to push you. I just want to be here. I want us to heal, but I know it won't happen overnight." He nodded, a quiet understanding passing between us. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for everything, but I want to try. I don't want to carry this anger anymore." That moment, those words, felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. The truth was, I wasn't sure how much I had expected forgiveness. I had lived so many years in guilt, regretting every decision, every word that had driven him away. But hearing him say that he was willing to try, willing to give us both a chance, was more than I could have ever asked for. We didn't solve everything in that one conversation, but we had taken an important step. My son had let me back into his life, and together, we were beginning the painful yet necessary journey of healing. The days that followed were filled with more moments of connection. We didn't rush things. There were still difficult conversations to have, still painful truths to face, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope. Hope that no matter how long it took, we could rebuild what had been lost. For the first time in years, I felt that there was a chance for us. And that, in itself, was healing. By the time Christmas had passed, I had begun to believe that, perhaps for the first time in decades, my son and I were on the path to healing. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't easy, but it felt like we were finally learning how to be part of each other's lives again. The pain of the past, those long, silent years, was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it no longer had the power to define us. We were both willing to work for something better, something that could build a future instead of remaining trapped in the wounds of the past. The days after Christmas were spent slowly finding our rhythm together. There were quiet moments where we simply sat and talked, small exchanges about the world outside the walls of his house, what I had missed, what he had seen, what he thought about life. There was still much to learn about each other, but the barriers had started to come down. Each conversation, each shared meal, and each small action felt like a step forward. I spent the next few weeks at his house. It wasn't just about spending time with him. It was about getting to know the man he had become. His life was different now. He was a husband, a father, a working professional, and though I had missed so much of it, I found myself incredibly proud of him. He was strong, kind, and so much more than I could have imagined all those years ago when I had last seen him. The fact that he had built such a beautiful family, that he was a good father to his children, spoke volumes to the kind of person he was. But there were still moments where I could see the weight of our past pressing on him. He was reluctant to let go of the anger, the years of hurt and betrayal that had followed his departure. There were still questions that remained unanswered, things he hadn't forgiven or even fully understood. And though he tried his best to be patient with me, I could tell that there were things we hadn't yet addressed, things that needed to be said before we could truly move forward. He still had his doubts, his fears that the past might repeat itself, that he might be hurt again. And who could blame him? One evening, as we sat together on the porch, watching his children play in the yard, he turned to me with a look of quiet determination. "Mom," he said, his voice steady but uncertain, "I want to try. I know we can't go back, and I know things will never be the same. But I don't want to live in the past anymore. I want to make something new, something better, for both of us." His words struck me with a force I hadn't anticipated. I had spent so much time wishing for the past, for the moments we had lost, that I had forgotten something crucial. What mattered most now was the future we were building, together. There would be no more time for regrets or dwelling on mistakes. The healing had to come not from looking back, but from looking forward. I had spent so many years feeling like I had failed as a mother, feeling like I had lost him for good, that the idea of a new beginning seemed almost impossible. But as I looked at my son, at the man he had become, I realized that this new beginning wasn't just about me making amends for the past. It was about us building something together, from scratch, piece by piece. A relationship that was grounded in the present, not shackled by the mistakes of yesterday. As the days passed, we began to talk more openly about what had happened all those years ago. We didn't rush into the hard conversations, but we had to face them eventually. I apologized over and over for the things I had done that had hurt him, for the moments when I had failed him as a mother. He, in turn, expressed the anger he had carried with him for so long, the feeling of abandonment, of being left behind without explanation. It wasn't easy, and there were tears, sometimes even angry words, but there was also understanding. The healing had started, and each conversation, no matter how difficult, was another small step forward. By the time I left his house to return home, I knew that we weren't finished. The road ahead would be long, and there would still be bumps along the way. But for the first time in years, I felt that we had the chance to get it right. We had the chance to rebuild, to learn to be family again. We weren't the same people we were when we had last parted ways, and that was okay. What mattered now was that we were both willing to try. I left his house with a sense of peace that I had not felt in a long time. I wasn't walking away with all the answers, but I was walking away with something more important, a future. We were no longer stuck in the past. We were creating something new together, one day at a time. And for the first time in 26 years, I truly believed that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for both of us. It wasn't the ending of the story I had imagined all those years ago, but it was the beginning of something even better. A story of healing, of hope, and of the love that had never truly faded, Even after all this time,